Wonderful, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Resource Partnerships Matter, Funding a Whole Family Approach. And as we begin today's important discussion around this topic, I would like to invite us to ground ourselves in the promise of community action, which says, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. I think a key aspect or a takeaway phrase from that is that we believe in the promise that every family should have access to the opportunity for success. A little bit about the host project or entity for today's webinar. The Learning Communities Resource Center is basically a center, or it functions as the innovation hub for the Community Action Partnership, aimed to promote promising practices and ultimately highlight those promising strategies or efforts that seek to interrupt both the causes and the conditions of poverty. And so with that said, we are pleased to offer several approaches to trying to achieve this big goal. One of those being our research and curation of resources related to several key anti-poverty innovations, as well as the facilitation of several learning community groups. And one of those learning community groups in particular is the Whole Family Approach Community of Practice that is supported by the AECF Foundation and our Community Action Economic Mobility Initiative. With that said, I am excited to just highlight the members of the Learning Communities Resource Center team. There are several of us who play very important, different roles in making events like today possible. And as you know, the title of today's presentation is Resource Partnerships Matter, Funding a Whole Family Approach. And I'm excited to go ahead and hand off the moderation of today's conversation to our special guest, Gail Hayes, who, as I said, she will serve as today's moderator. And to tell you a little bit about Gail, she is a former staff person from the AECF Foundation. For about a decade, she served as the director of the Atlanta Civic Site and really played a vital role in the pioneering of the Foundation's two-generation approach or whole family approach efforts. Currently, she serves as a coach for 3 community action agencies within our community of practice that I just recently mentioned. Additionally, she serves as a coach and consultant for the state of Maine, key organizations and foundations. And so with that said, Gail, I am pleased to hand off the conversation to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. We're all looking forward to our discussion with you today.
Gail, you are on, and if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Gail, we're going to try that again.
Okay, am I on now?
So we ask for everyone's patience as we try to work through a bit of technical difficulties here. So Gail, we have you unmuted on our side. However, we can't hear you at this time.
I'm unmuted on my side. Hello? I think the other people that have joined in can hear me. Can you hear me? Hello?
Gail, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. All right, thanks so much. Again, let me start from the beginning. Thanks, Tiffany, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. We're all looking forward to our session with you today. Today's topic is Resource Partnerships Matter, and it's going to be all about identifying and aligning resources with your whole family model to improve the well-being of families in your community. I want to make a special note that this webinar is based on the assumption that your organization has already conducted a design process and developed either a theory of change or logic model that outlines your whole family approach and how you are working with others in the community to meet families where they are and provide customized, high-quality, intensive services to parents and children at the same time. There's a little assumption that we are assuming that you're down the path of whole family. I'm going to advance to the next slide. And I wanted you to know that the panel today has just the right credentials for the topic. We have a foundation leader in 2-generation or whole family programs, which is Rosa Maria Castaneda, who's a senior program officer with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Good afternoon, Rosa Maria. We also have a federal agency leader who has been a long-time champion for a whole family approach, and that's Elaine Zimmerman, who is the regional administrator for the Administration for Children and Families Region 1. And that region includes Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and myself. The intended result for today's webinar is to help you learn more on how to build successful funding partnerships. And I think 2 of the most important critical success factors in building those relationships are relationship building and strategic fit. And by strategic fit, I'm really talking about where the alignment of your whole family outcomes fits perfectly with a funding opportunity. And those are 2 terms, relationship building and strategic fit, that we'll be using and revisit often during the webinar. Today's webinar will be organized around a resource development process, which includes 6 steps that you see there on the slide. It's a process for both maintaining and developing important funding partnerships that, again, are aligned with your whole family outcomes and can ensure sustainability for your approach. And we'll be talking about each of these steps as we go along. The first step which we're calling is to analyze and define your resource needs. And the very first task in defining your whole family resource needs is defining your model itself. And as you know, there are very different models being used by community action agencies across the country, but there are 3 primary components in those models. And the first is a child development component, which is really to ensure that children are ready for school and succeed in school. And it includes high quality early learning, home visitation, after school programs, and social and emotional development for children. The second important component is a workforce development component to ensure that parents are on a pathway to self-sufficiency and can include post-secondary education, career pathway coaching, job training, apprenticeships, and internships. And the final key component is family development to ensure that families are strong and thriving. And this can include social capital development, family coaching, parent leadership, social and emotional family development, and parent training. The second task under defining your resource needs is actually examining your existing staffing and funding partnerships that are aligned with your model. Many of you have already done this. You've actually have secured private and public resource partnerships. Some examples is many of you have a Head Start or Early Learning Head Start partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services. You could have a WIOA partnership with the Department of Labor. And several of you really have provided leadership with securing LIHEAP partnerships with the Department of Health and Human Services. And the last task under defining your resource needs is to identify opportunities for leveraging resources. And I'm going to be asking, there are kind of three strategies for leveraging. They're called braiding, blending, and pooling. And there's an excellent resource that's been developed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which is showing there on the screen, which is a brief called Advancing Two-Generation Approaches, Funding to Help Families Succeed. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Rosa Maria to talk about this particular brief and the strategies that are outlined in that.
Thank you so much. This is Rosa Maria. Appreciate the invitation to join you today. Two-generation work is, was described, really exciting, but also we know from, I'm sure, your practice experience so far that it's challenging to, figure out how to finance it, resource it, sustain the work, and working in innovative ways requires innovative thinking on the funding side. For example, strategies in 2Gen that aren't often funded are, whole family coaching, whole family assessment, developing partnerships with groups that you want to, combine strengths with, aligning parent and child data. These are some things that we think about as part of, integral to two-generation strategies, not just the programs themselves, but also how they're delivered, that we have to come up with some more interesting ways to actually have families experience services more seamlessly and in a strength-based way. So our foundation has invested in this approach and strategy for a number of years. We thought that we wanted to showcase what are some ways that some of the organizations that we've supported or others have supported are doing this. So we surveyed and interviewed 6 2Gen sites over the spring and summer about 2 years ago. We tried to showcase a number of different types of 2Gen programs in the resource and the brief that you're looking at. Some are single organizations, others are broad neighborhood-based partnerships with multiple organizations to highlight the diverse funding strategies. Each of them used a variety of funding sources and strategies to finance their work. Let me just say, all of them had, they're based on different platforms, but they all had a sustainable funding source at the heart of their financing strategies, and all of them tried to really think about, projecting out for 2 to 3 years how they would support their work. So it's important to think from the beginning about what's your sustainability strategies. So that's really important. Now, as Gail said, there were sort of 3 big approaches that emerged from that on-the-ground research. The first is braiding, and I'm just going to go through 3 terms, what they mean, and very briefly, very high level, how they're used, what they are, how they're used. So the first one is braiding. This is an allocation strategy that coordinates multiple sources of funding for discrete purposes. Say you're tapping the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and the TANF program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, to do more for families in your 2Gen approach than either single funding source could do alone. So that's why it's called braiding. It can help you streamline programs. It can help, and particularly streamline the family experience of the programs. Rather than just operating them in siloed ways, you're braiding the experience for families to bolster a program. Now, that still, just like every use of every funding source, requires very careful accounting about how every dollar from each funding source is spent. So it doesn't save you the back-end work around ensuring that you are true to grant purposes and are reporting, accurately, et cetera, but it's about the frontline experience for families that you are braiding sources of funds together for a whole family experience. The second approach is called blending. And blending is a strategy that usually involves combining at least two separate funding sources for similar services to meet a family's needs. Now, there are, frankly, few opportunities to blend funds for two-generation programs. But some of the organizations that we interviewed were doing so actually primarily for kids' needs. So, for example, they were drawing on Head Start combined with Child Care and Development Block Grant money for early care and education to create full-day, high-quality care for kids. Some of them were also tapping into local preschool financing. None of the programs that we looked at were actually blending funding streams for adults, but we did see that they were doing so to meet children's needs. You might find some ways that you could do so for adult needs and adult services. The last one is called pooling, and as the term conveys, this is a pooling of resources into one pot. So rather than tying each funding source to a specific program or service, you're pulling it together. Typically, and I should say, you can do pooling when you have funding streams that are a little bit looser, that are more discretionary. Typically, entities that have received grant funding and philanthropic support, they might pool some resources to meet needs that they can't currently meet with existing funding sources. Typically, you pool resources together. They're not like unaccountable, but hopefully it's less accountability, not accountability, but less reporting, less strings attached to these resources to achieve some high-level outcome, such as if your big goal is helping families achieve financial stability, that's your goal, that's your North Star, rather than just X number of families participating in this program, X number of families participating in that program. You are working with a bigger goal in mind and saying, we're going to pool these resources, use them in more, in these ways towards a particular goal and aim. It's more outcome, it should be more outcome oriented. And pooling differs from blending in that no mechanism usually exists to report which funding source covered every expense. Like I said, that you still have to do with the first two strategies when you're pooling, which is in many ways, again, unusual and in some ways quite ideal and advantageous. You don't have to do that, which funding source is for exact which expense. You are pulling resources together towards one goal, and there's still accountability, but it's a little bit looser in what it allows you to do and how it allows you to meet families' needs. And typically this is used to fund gaps in services, again, that aren't typically there. So those are high level, the three types of funding strategies that we see 2Gen programs and entities practicing and innovating with. These aren't unique to two-generation programs, but they really are, I think, much more practiced by 2Gen programs because of the way we're looking to, represent a new way of serving families. So I hope you find these useful. Happy to take questions about them. And if you do download the report from the KC website, you can just look up, might be a link available to you, but if you look up any KC two-generation financing strategies or funding strategies, you'll access the report there with examples and a lot more kind of grounded detail than we can than we can cover here.
Okay, we're going to move ahead with the webinar. Thank you, Rosa Maria. That was very useful information. So we're now moving to step 2. After you've defined your resource needs, the second step is identifying funding sources. And there are 3 primary sources: government or public funding, which includes federal, state, and local funding, private business and corporate support, and then finally, private funding from foundations. I'm going to actually now turn it over to Elaine Zimmerman to offer her insights about whole family opportunities with federal partnerships. Elaine?
So much. I'm so glad to join the call. And I think to Rosa's point about braiding, blending, and pooling, you know, unfortunately at this point in time, it's not the case that there's a set of funds for 2-gen work and a whole family approach, which is why the braiding, pooling, and funding and blending is what we're seeing. What I'd like to do, as somebody who's worked both in the community nonprofit, on the regional level, on the state level, and on the federal level, what I'd really like to do is to talk tactics to help people get the resources they need in the context of whole family. I think that what we're starting to see federally and on state levels is there's an awareness of an integrated approach and a whole family approach, but it's just the beginning, which means that the way we're going to be able to move this forward and find the resources that are necessary is by being the leaders ourselves to affect change and to garner these resources. It's not as if we're at a supermarket and there's apples and pears and bananas and we can just go to the right little bin and we're going to get it. It doesn't really exist yet. It's actually very novel when you see something with whole family language in it, or for that matter, even 2-generational language in it, because it's a new way of doing business. And so the truth is that the way to garner resources here is for, we need to change. And we need to change and become the leaders that ask on the city, county, state, and federal level for more resources that would respect the whole family, and to be able to argue and show that a whole family approach offers more efficacy, because the research clearly shows that if we address the needs of the parent or the caretaker, whoever that may be, and the child concurrently, that things happen in a speedier way and that the outcomes are more enduring. So, but that is not how government works, as you all know. Things tend to be siloed, done by funding stream, and the truth is, the most rigorous truth is that the family is the horizontal band across a host of vertical silos. And the silos actually are really problematic, as we all know. And so we need to sort of disrupt these silos. And there is an effort in Washington to disrupt the silos, and there's some effort on the state level and county level, but it's few and far between. And so it's one of these cases where the change is going to need to come from the ground up and from those of us who on the state and federal level are moving agenda within these systems to begin more and more to push. Now, we are pushing, and for those of you who know, in Region 1 of the federal government, we have moved across all 6 states a whole family approach agenda with all 6 states in New England working on this. And we are together identifying program and policy alignment opportunities, supporting local and state-driven strategies, and we've created a learning community of best practices and policies, and through that, we've been able to get federal interest. So various leaders took interest over time in this, including the Assistant Secretary, who's keenly committed to a 2-generational strategy, and some of the different agencies, because they understand the intersection of the social determinants of health with employment success and family well-being. But the truth is that human services is not yet fully married to economics and to employment. And the social determinants of health, which should be the undergirding of all of this, are not yet integrated because the fields of health, human services, and employment are not connected. And so we need to model this on the local, regional, state, and federal level. And so all of us together, I don't think actually it's going to take a great deal. I think the more we model and show the gains of this, the more we're going to be able to change the funding sources and the funding mechanisms. I'm already watching in the philanthropic world, they're beginning to put in and reward for two-generational practice. And I'm watching federally language shift linguistically, and there's more and more talk of a whole family approach. But it is not yet embedded in funding. I am going to talk tactically about ways I think that can help you garner funds, and I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about what I would consider new beltways, sort of ignored areas where I think there's plenty of opportunity to do this work and actually some money. So I'll get to that. But I think to be very, very candid and rigorous, the change has to happen first with us, that in two-gen practice, it's not two-gen if we're not collaborative. So any grant that would come from a single agency is not two-generational. Two-generation means that we are working across health, safety, learning, employment, undergirding with the social determinants of health. So it means that we do not have to take it all up ourselves, and certainly community action works in a host of domains. But it does mean that we partner, and that we partner with parents, we partner with business, with physicians, with key leaders in employment who are looking at the worker shortage. Across all these domains, it's really critical that we understand that we are not the agency. And if the agency acts as if it is the agency in application, rather than putting the family in the center, I'll go to the next slide, please. If we can understand that the family is the agency, then what we can do is we can bring in partners ranging from pediatric leaders, leaders in pediatrics and leaders in social health and business leaders who are, just dying to address the worker shortage because it's affecting their economic growth. So we have to think differently in terms of our partnerships. And grants, the same way that Rosa was talking about braiding, blending, and pooling, our grant applications need to cross these domains. One, that is how they're going to stand out. And two, that is what two-gen is, because if we are working both thinking about the needs of the parent or whoever the caretaker is and the child, and we're working across generation and across the health, employment, and well-being needs of the family, no one agency can do that. So I would recommend, one, that we understand that our resources are only as large as our authentic partnerships, and that it is our authentic partnerships that is our social capital, and without that, we will not succeed. And I'll discuss a few areas of example. Essentially, two-gen offers us, if you will, almost a potluck of assets and policy levers, but only if we bring together the different stakeholders. And that also means working horizontally and vertically. It means bringing in legislators, executive branch leaders, mayors, parents, business, health practitioners, et cetera, and bringing in people not just at the top, but on the ground and at the mid-level, because that's where culture change can happen. So without those pieces, essentially two-gen is a movement. It's not a grant. And a movement entails much harder work. We have to bring, a rake, hose, hoe, the whole thing, and understand that we're changing ourselves, really honestly having to change how we lead and how we do business, and also changing our partnerships up a little bit. So, what makes two-gen different? Families in the center, we're working across silo and funding stream, because these silos and funding streams are a sheer insult to the family. And it's a mix, I think, of how people, have done business, but it also really isn't understanding what families do and how much they have to cross all these different streams. It's aligning the goals with our partners, bringing in unexpected stakeholders to create a little bit of surprise and magic instead of it always being the same service providers, carefully attending to framework and language. When we called our initiative in New England 2Gen, it was, interesting because it's 2 syllables and it sounds sexy. But the truth was, when we called it a whole family approach to jobs, we were able to bring in family policy people, employment people. The whole family had a real interest in public health. They were really interested. We were able to bring in both Democrats and Republicans who were willing for different reasons to be interested in that, whereas you just couldn't get very far if you just called it 2Gen. So we framed it in New England, a whole family approach to jobs, and then under that was a line that was really deeply a 2Gen line, which said, helping parents work and children thrive. So a whole family approach to jobs, helping parents work and children thrive. And changing the framework changed the resources. It was pretty extraordinary. It's really critical to talk about values if you want to get any resources in this work. Ed Ziegler and Sherry Hayes did a study on what moves child policy forward in the United States. And what they discovered was that it was critical to have a leader, to have really, really solid research, to have a media strategy, that you couldn't do anything without a constituency. And I would argue that the constituency for 2Gen are parents and business and health. It's not the nonprofit sector, it's the customer. So they discovered it was critical to have a constituency, and they also discovered it was absolutely critical to have and articulate values. Now, this is not the case in a host of domains, but in the child policy domain, it's critical to know what the values are that you're articulating. And I've learned tactically, both, from when I've been in the nonprofit world and working for states and both working in the federal government, I don't do anything without figuring out what the values are of the collaborators and partners that I'm working with, and what are the values in the goal. And if you can't articulate the values, you're not going to succeed. And remember that the family is the horizontal band that really crosses over all these ridiculous vertical silos. So I would argue that that our social capital is in our culture shifts that we ourselves make through our partnerships, and that we actually need to think not just who's not at the table, but who are we not even thinking about that would be critical to a whole family approach, and to bring them in. That almost should be an assignment very, very early on in this work. It's both the magic of the unexpected that calls the attention to those who have resources, but it also makes it a piece of art and a composition that is alive and not just a service delivery for a nonprofit agency. So that's both tactic and I think a way of doing business differently. Next slide, please. I'm going to actually flip it. Are we able to go, can we go back and forth? Because, yeah, perfect, thank you. So the values of 2Gen practice, when I was originally thinking about that, are that I'm sure you can all add more or, certainly edit this out, but the family is the unit, family poverty needs to end, and that we need to improve child outcomes. There's only one entry point for both the parent and the child, that they shouldn't have to go all over the place to get a whole family approach, that learning, work, and family strength are intertwined, that there's a dignity and commitment to diversity, that there always must be social capital for the customer, that it's not a sort of condescending strategy where someone's being taught how to be a better parent or how to do things better, but it's actually a peer-to-peer strategy, and that it's for fathers and mothers, not just mothers, and of course it includes grandparents and whoever else is involved in the caregiving, that it's a streamlined service full of resource efficacy, and that the needs of the family are prioritized over bureaucracy. And then if we could go back to the earlier diagram. Yeah, thank you. This is actually our error, but the title's wrong because this diagram is really not about the values. This diagram shows the different places that you could think about partners, you know, when I was talking about partners, because if you look at this diagram, I like it a lot. This was done by Connecticut Voices in Connecticut. I use it a lot. What you see here is looking at the 4 different areas of child development, workforce, social capital, and educational opportunities, but it also shows you all the different sorts of folks you could go to and think about in partnership if you wished. So now we can go forward. Thank you to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I was thinking about, there's a host of partners, but in 2Gen work, parents are in the center, and they truly need to be in the center. And if we're very honest, the truth is that government on the federal, state, and local level rarely knows how to bring the parent in front and center, and that many community agencies work some in partnership, but not as much as they might wish when we're honest together. And so, you know, parents end up being an ignored constituency. They're naturally motivated. They have the real insights about what is and isn't working in the systems that we've designed. They're able to reach the hard to reach, and they can reach both informal and formally. And of most importance, the research shows that when parents are really involved, not service, I'm not talking about being service, I'm talking about being partners in this, being involved from a civic vantage point. When parents are engaged, what you find is improved educational outcomes, decreased healthcare costs, and significant increases in safety. Next slide, please. So, you know, I think it's pretty obvious, and you all know this as community action agencies, but some of the roles that parents can play that no other partner can is they present the consumer voice, and they're able to say this works or it doesn't, or I was poor and now I have a job, or I was poor and I got a job and then I hit the cliff effect, and then these people helped me and I got more training and I got coaching, and now I don't have to worry about the cliff effect, and now I'm actually working in a hospital. So the parent message is critical. You can see, and you already know these roles, but I would argue that when people see that we actually are partnering in the deepest and truest way with parents as partners, as advisors, as consultants, it will increase your viability for resources. Okay, let's keep going. Next slide. I wanted to share, so there are definitely certain federal funds that I think are useful in the 2Gen work. One is TANF, and many of you, well, not many, but some of you are already using TANF for your 2Gen work. TANF is clearly a place to go for this work. I think other places to go are Title I dollars, because Title I in education has resources for parent engagement. And so if you're doing 2Gen work and you're really bringing in parents as partners, you could go to education and talk with them about this as an opportunity. Looking at the social determinants of health and truly working on health as a component of this, you can then bring in Medicaid. So, you know, look at Vermont. They've done extraordinary work bringing Medicaid in and the social determinants of health and beginning to use Medicaid to help with housing. So, you know, it's back to Rosa's original presentation, and think about this. There are not bins with immediate dollars in 2Gen and whole family approach, but if we change how we do our own business, and if we look at things slightly differently, we're able to garner certain federal dollars. And so I think TANF's key, Medicaid has real opportunity, Title I, but I also wanted to talk about what I call just playfully new beltways, sort of untapped areas that people aren't paying attention to. And the opportunity zones are a new opportunity. You know, it's essentially a tax benefit for people who have assets, significant assets, to not pay capital gains taxes if they put their money in areas that are impoverished. And so this tax law that was written for 2017, really helps the wealthy deposit their money to pay less taxes, and doesn't have language on the other side of the law to help poor people. But in opportunity zones, there are dollars being deposited, and there are some opportunity zones where the community's actually created an outstanding plan, and where philanthropy's gotten involved, and the city's gotten involved, and there's really good stuff happening. So just as an example, we are involved in Lewiston, Maine, where there's money coming in, and we are working in Lewiston, Maine to actually reconsider rebuilding the housing stock there, which is full of lead toxicity and harming the children, and creating jobs for people in the rebuilding. So I share the opportunity zone not because I think it's the be-all, end-all, but I want to actually show that I think here when we think about resources, we have to think out of the box, look for new beltways and new opportunities. So this is one of them. Next slide, please. Many of you, by the way, because of the work, the outstanding work of community action agencies, are in opportunity zones. And if you're not, your work is, of course, connected to families in poverty. And so finding out what are the opportunity zones in my region, and do any of them have plans, and can I partner? Because the dollars are in some of these areas coming in, like in Connecticut, Windham, which is very, very poor town, has just gotten millions of dollars. They've never seen anything like it, and they have a plan now, and they're really coming up with comprehensive ways of new building, growth, all connected to employment and disrupting poverty. So this is an area that I think is uncharted on the poverty disruption side and worth looking at. Here's another example that you can see in Maine. They got a $31 million investment in an opportunity zone, and it's leading to a factory and 100 jobs for locals in forest product work. So think new, go to untapped areas. I also wanted to share another untapped area, which is not yet out yet, so I'm sharing this a little prematurely, but it does look like there's going to be an announcement. The Department of Health and Human Services is going to be announcing the use of HHS funding for transportation as a match to FTA grant programs. So that would include as a match for enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities, rural formula grants, and tribal transit formula grants. So that's the sort of protocol for this is coming out in January, so it's not out yet. But once again, if one could use existing dollars as matches for transportation, that's going to free up other dollars. So thinking creatively and mathematically here, all within a poverty disruption and economic mobility and family well-being frame is the way to go. So I'm going to conclude with this, but essentially my challenge to myself as a leader and to you as leaders is that we have to do business differently, that the dollars are not sitting there, that we're going to need to change what we do and show outcomes and show partnerships differently, because then I think we can change the culture. I'm already watching the culture change, so this is an opportunity for transformation that we have to lead. Thank you.
So, Gail, you are on. Not sure if you're experiencing some technical difficulties. As Gail is coming online, we have on the screen a poll for you all to use the chat window to respond related to this. The question is, what funding partnerships have you secured for your whole family approach within your agency? So you would take a moment to use the chat window. Give the name of your agency too. What funding partnerships have you secured for your whole family approach?
So I think you've handed back the sound to me, Tiffany. I appreciate that. What I'm going to do, Elaine, by the way, thank you very much for your insights. I think that's going to be very helpful to the agencies that have signed on today's webinar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go through some of the federal sources, and I think many of you know these, so I'm not really in this, webinar, and everything that's on it will be shared with you. But I've listed them by the main components, and we've both Rose Maria and Elaine have talked about the blending and braiding that's occurred with some of these. I'm going to move to the next slide, which is around workforce development. Again, many of you have the ones, especially the sites I'm coaching, I know have really been have created partnerships around with WIOA and with other programs, including SNAP and TANF. The one that I wanted to mention is partnerships with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There's a terrific 2-gen program in Maine called Families Forward, and they've really been using the Family Self-Sufficiency Program as a platform for their work. The last one I'll talk about is family development sources, which you know very well. And again, I think community action agencies really have taken the leadership of partnering around LIHEAP funds. I know that one of the sites that I know well, which is ACAP, which is the Aroostook County Community Action Program, they've really taken a lead role and really using these funds to partner around their whole family approach. I'll turn to state resources. And again, many of you have really provided the examples. I know that in Maryland, Virginia, and Maine, the community action agencies have recently been successful in securing general revenue and or TANF funds to support their whole family approach. So, as you think about your state, you might want to be in touch with Maryland, Virginia, and Maine community action agencies to see how they've done that. Again, there are state workforce funds and child care funds. As part of this identifying funding sources, and as Elaine was talking about, there really are opportunities that I think we often overlook in terms of partnering with business and corporate partners. They are currently already investing in 2-generation whole family approaches. And some examples I want to mention: local banks are investing in financial literacy and asset building strategies. We've got companies that are investing in apprenticeships with the trades. And then there's been lots of business investing in early learning and grade level reading campaigns with both books and back to school resources. Your local Chamber of Commerce is one of those groups that you really need to have a close ally, because they're really going to be able to help you figure out which businesses would be aligned with the outcomes that you're really seeking to achieve with whole family. Again, board members, trusted partners, if you've got a local United Way, these are really the sources to really introduce you to and connect with the business community. The other group, maybe the unusual suspects that Elaine was talking about, many of you do this whole family work with community partners. There are examples of clinicians being assigned to work with the families in a whole family approach. There are health screening, health assessments being done by public health partners along with their early intervention services. There are examples of loaned executives or loaned job coaches. And there's just all kinds of support that community action agencies are getting from community colleges and businesses around career pathway counseling. These others you all know and I'm sure already use, and some of the organizations are beginning to do fee-for-services, private pay for the services, which can also provide another resource. I'm going to stop for just a second and talk about step 3, which is, as you do this work, it's really important for you to create a team that's helping you think about aligning your strategy with potential funding opportunities. And these are really recruiting people from outside your agency, finding community members who have access to funding opportunities. This is where you can bring in parent leaders. You can bring in legislators. You can bring in business executives. You can bring in influential community volunteers or community activists who really can sit around the table and begin to help you think about an integrated funding strategy that matches up with the very important outcomes you're trying to achieve for families with the funding opportunity. Your agency leadership is essential. So, you really want to get your CEO, your CFO involved in this. The fourth step is partnering with foundations. And, I think you all know that private foundations have been among the best champions of the two-generation or whole family approach. There are, I've listed 3 foundations who've been leading national foundations around this work. They've really been trying to build the field around providing technical assistance grants. They've given intermediary support to the two-generation intermediate Ascend. They've been funding evaluation research and implementation guides, including one that's really important if you don't know about it, is the family-centered coaching tool. But they're also local foundation champions. The John T. Gorman Foundation has been a great champion of investing in two-generation approaches in Maine, Winthrop Rockefeller in Arkansas, the Henry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation in Maryland, and the Whitehead Foundation here in Georgia. I'm going to ask Rosa Maria to talk a little bit about, from a funder, private foundations perspective, about how they invest and what their funding priorities are.
Thank you so much. This is a really nice blending of sort of a philosophical mind shift and a practical mind shift. I so much appreciate the content shared by Gail and Elaine so far. We can take this show on the road, ladies. So Gail asked me to comment a little bit on the philanthropy piece. So I'll say a couple of things. I mean, as Gail said, there's sort of national strategic philanthropy, local community foundations, local United Ways, venture philanthropy. I am going to just give some kind of thoughts and hints for your consideration and how to tap into philanthropic resources. I mean, obviously the advantage of foundation support is that you can, it doesn't have the sort of, as many ties to a particular funding stream as programmatic support does. So you could use it in different ways. It's a more flexible funding source, a more diverse package of options in terms of support. So as Gail said, philanthropy has been key to kind of boost the two-generation field and support the peer learning, support some of the essential elements of two-generation strategies that have been talked about. But it's when you sort of think, when you approach philanthropy, it's about, you're leading with what results are you looking to accomplish with these private sources of funding. And I think you've got to sort of lead with what are the results that you're aiming for. Are you looking to, test new ways of delivering services? Are you looking to test a particular, service tool? Are you looking to collect data on how well you're doing in your current work? Are you looking to build evidence around an innovative approach that you're doing, or you're really established and actually building the evidence base for what you're doing is, just the right stage for you and can actually help you scale? Are you testing an innovation? Something that hasn't been done before. So, or are you looking to expand or scale? Is it something where, you're approaching philanthropy for, we want to grow in different places, we want to serve more people? Are you also expanding to reach a specific population? So these are all questions that are more sort of outcome-oriented. That is, I think, what philanthropy looks to hear and would be engaging to philanthropy rather than we just want to deliver this service, we just want to sustain what we're doing, these families have needs. It's really kind of try to think of a more sort of results-oriented, and those are the very broad array of results that you might consider. Typically, you don't approach philanthropy with, sustainability. We don't think it's sad. I wish it wasn't the case, but I've had really terrific programs that approach us just with the lens of we're great. Can you help us sustain what we're doing? Sometimes we do that, but often we're also looking for, okay, we believe in this. We're looking to sustain it, but towards what end? So it's better to not lead with, we're great, help us sustain, help us continue, but lead with some of the other ideas. You might have some as well that, have been successful for you. But that's, strategic philanthropy has this kind of different mindset about it, and that's why it's kind of filling these gaps and supporting the 2Gen field. I'll say a couple of things. One is it's great to lead with a success story with philanthropy, something that could really humanize, what you're looking to do, tell a story around it. But don't use story as tricks. I mean, you will always be asked, can you back that up with data? Can you back that up with a broader understanding, more context, more than just one success story? However, again, I think that, leading with the human element is, truly important. Also, I'm trying to get at, a couple of hints in a short time frame for you. But another is, I think both, actually, Gail talked about engaging and relationship building with any funding source, but I think especially with philanthropy. Often there's not a lot of, you want to build relationships with philanthropy over time that can lead to, engaging them in a longer term way in terms of supporting your work. So I think it's really important, the relationship building element. You want to think about opportunities to invite philanthropic entities, philanthropists to your events before you make the ask for support. It could be alongside, but it could also be you've engaged them around relationship building, knowledge building. You're engaging them around what you're looking to learn, what you're looking to accomplish, and you're finding out along the way what are they interested in, what are their priorities. That's also complements to, of course, just looking up on their websites. We're very transparent about what we're about, what our values are. A lot of philanthropy is very transparent, not all of it, by the way. But if you can find information about what are the goals, often there are explicitly stated priority populations. So that's something to look up. But the soft approach around what you're looking to learn together, what are they interested in, how can they help you accomplish your goals, you also want to think of engaging philanthropy in a dual directional way where, we in philanthropy learn with and through you. So often we have these lofty goals that we, share and very ambitious results that we aim to achieve, but we're all constantly refining our strategies. Finding out about 2Gen. Actually, the Casey Foundation, certainly led in the 2Gen space, but we actually led because we were listening. We actually led because the entities, the organizations that we were supporting were telling us these are the challenges that we're facing, these are the barriers, I know you want these results, but these are the issues that we're facing, and we actually think, we want to test something new, and that a more holistic two-generation approach is something that we're gonna move in that direction. I hope you come with us. But that's what we think is needed. And that's what makes us credible to the field and helps us, continue to engage families to get to results. So both at the front end, you want to engage philanthropy in terms of what we're looking to learn together. You want to be honest about what challenges you're grappling with. And, you can be honest about this is what's not supported through our work. If we're going to get to that vision, if we want to get to these results, this is what isn't supported. Some practical ideas that Gail and I had thought together were, how you reach out to philanthropy. I mean, you could do cold calls, but as I said, that's time-consuming and often not the ideal strategy. There might be some ways that you find applications online, but it takes a lot of time to develop a grant application, and a lot of philanthropy doesn't take, grant applications unless we particularly invite it, and unless we either as a, RFP, or we know we want to fund you and we want to work together to craft a grant together. But look for allies that have ties to philanthropy. Do you know folks that sit on their boards? Do you know folks who give advice and counsel, who are consultants to foundation? Who do the local foundations listen to about who to engage with? And again, what are the partnerships that they already have, potential employer partnerships that already exist that you could tap into? So anytime someone can do an introduction for you, if you don't already have a relationship, just like with everything, that is much more conducive to getting, much more likely to get attention. If there are folks that you know that have received a grant from a foundation, ask, who's the program officer? Can you do an introduction? What do they care about? What's the grant process like? You also have to consider, do you want to be in relationship with this foundation? That's important. Values, as Elaine said, matter in your work, matter for who you partner with, matter for who you work with. So you do definitely want to get to know who you are looking to work with. But again, the big headline is relationship building, knowledge building, learning partners in your work. Let me say a couple last things. One idea was actually take, as I said, invite philanthropy to your events. One idea that we have seen and done and ourselves, but also have really appreciated, is take funders on a data walk. That a data walk means you have maybe an event where you have certain data, figures posted around the room, and if you can combine like real human stories with some data at an event, that's really appealing. To have funders engage both with families and folks that you are working with or aspiring to work with, and also looking at data around the case for doing what you say needs to be done. That's important. I cannot end without saying that, 2Gen is, can be appealing to any kind of philanthropy, whether it's that's focused on young adults or family opportunity or social justice funders or early care funders, because as Elaine said, it's an approach to work. But I do want to say that from our foundation's perspective, social justice is at the core and the center, and racial equity is at the core and the center of two-generation strategies. And what we look for, a thing we especially look for is has your two-generation approach considered, inequities in the community, in the state, in who is served, in outcomes, So all the way from looking at what are the, core original challenges that you're trying to solve for, down to who are you serving and supporting, and does it really advance racial equity? Is it really breaking down inequitable outcomes in the program and outcomes in society? That is something that at least Casey Foundation will take a very strong look at. And, we often throw around the words hard to serve, hard to reach. They're hard to serve and hard to reach if you're on the outside and not designed things in a way that could engage. So we will take a very, very strong lens around how does this advance racial equity, how does it break down racial barriers, how does it reduce, inequitable outcomes for a number of different groups, and particularly racial ethnic groups, but also other breakdowns. We'll take a very close look at that. We'll also take a very close look at the parent and family engagement elements of your work. So those are core, and I often like to say, if you are not, advancing racial equity through your 2Gen work, you're not doing it right. That is critically important, no matter who you're working with, that you consider, is the work that you're doing really advancing racial equity? And we have supported and continue to support 2-generation strategies for many different populations, one of which is that we've been a kind of a leader in is children of immigrants and immigrant families. In addition, we also are leading new work around 2-generation strategies with youth and young adults, and particularly young parents, young adult families. So that's a new direction for, not brand new, but certainly something that you'll see more of us do. So those are some ideas for you, take what you think is, useful to you and effective. But, consider philanthropy a friend in your work, relationship building, learning together. Those are key elements that kind of might spark attention. I hope that's helpful, and I'm glad to take questions.
Thank you so much, Rosa Maria. Gail,
Yes.
I'm going to let you activate your sound there.
Great, thank you. Again, Rosemary, thank you so much for your advice. I think it was just right on point. And the next couple of slides are really just going to be giving you bullets on some of the advice that Rosemary gave you, doing your homework, knowing the foundation that you actually want to partner with, identifying individuals with close ties. The next slide is really talking about, which Rosemary really covered well, is cultivating a relationship. Some wise advice I got early in my career was never ask a stranger for money. And that's really about, knowing the person that you're really asking to invest and become a partner with. Rosemary mentioned that some foundations do not accept unsolicited proposals. So this cultivation is essential for forming a partnership. The next to last step is really, I'm going to spend just a minute on, is developing a competitive proposal and case statement. And I'm going to spend a minute on case statements because I think they're really so important. I think people just, don't really understand how much of an impact they can have on a potential funder. Elaine talked about this work being value-driven. And I think a case statement is really where the values that you hold most important around this whole family work can be woven into the case statement, along with the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve on behalf of families and children. And so I think this is really, the case statement is one that it will leave a lasting impression on the funder. And one thing I've learned is that people really remember the first and last paragraphs of the case statement. So if you really want to bring home the values that mean the most to you and the outcomes that are most important, really pay attention to that case statement. sources for writing that. One time I discovered a local journalist in Atlanta that had been covering issues around homelessness, and we actually recruited him to write the case statement. It was the best case statement that I've ever had the experience of using. So, you know, again, the unusual suspects. Journalists are great writers of case statements. Rosemary talked about having the competitive advantage on a winning proposal. Look at ones that were successful and really analyze why they were successful. The last piece I'm going to talk to you about under this step is really, they're going to sound like the most obvious tips in the world, but look at these. I can't tell you how many proposals I've gotten that, you know, it's not a strong proposal because the application had not been proofed carefully. Make sure your budget's aligned with your narrative and adds up correctly. It's really important to send a handwritten thank you note to the funder regardless of the outcome of their decision. And the cover letter that accompanies your proposal really makes, you know, leaves the first impression of your organization. The last step in this process is monitoring, reporting, and evaluating. We don't really have enough time to really go through this in detail, and I think we'll do a future webinar around this. But one is just make sure you set up a monitoring system to make sure all the grant requirements, deliverables, and reporting dates are recorded. Always add a cover letter to your reports. Rosemary talked about family success stories, and they really need to be authentic family success stories that really illustrate the outcomes and the values and the strategies that you're using. And again, we both have mentioned the importance of staying in touch with your funder. I'll end this by talking about relationships matter. We actually could have named this seminar about relationships matter because they really are key to forming resource partnerships, or I love the term Rosemary used, learning partnerships. I really think that, and she mentioned giving partnerships room to go. Think about your funding partners as thought partners and really seeking their advice on mid-course correction, new strategies, or issues or problems or challenges that you're having. I want to conclude by saying the future of your resource partnerships will depend on how you approach, build, and maintain them. And so I'm going to turn it back to Tiffany or Hyacinth to close the webinar or to take questions for us.
All right. And so at this time, we would like to invite anyone, if you have any questions, to utilize the chat at this time. We would love to receive one or two from you. And as folks are thinking about those last questions, I'd like to ask the members of the panel, in light of everything that was shared today, is there a final comment or a final word that you would like to offer to today's participants?
And one funding source that we haven't mentioned, although it's prospective really, we haven't mentioned the Family First Prevention Services Act, and that is a something to look out for the future, because there's a lot more flexibility in how states and territories can use this funding source, which is intended to curtail the use of congregate or group care for children and instead place emphasis on family, foster homes, etc. But it's a federal government funding source that goes to states, and it can be, going forward, used in more flexible ways, including with a two-generation lens, and can be used for sort of preventive approaches as well, to prevent kids going into care. So it's a prospective funding source. A lot of states are just starting to think about how to realign themselves and their supports along this. But that's the last thing I'll mention, just because it was the one left out of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Rosa Maria.
Hi, this is Elaine. Yeah, thank you for that, Rosa. I think a prevention lens on all of this is paramount. You know, in the Family First dollars, it's really prevention within a child welfare frame, but I think prevention overall is going to see its day in the sun. And so thinking with a prevention lens is true prevention lens, primary, secondary, and tertiary, is a very good idea. And then, you know, watching and participating in the Family First discussions in your state is a very good idea. And there's also ample opportunity to look at research-based practices, because only research-based and proven practices are being funded within Family First. And then really just the closing thought is that, you know, I think unlike many sort of programs and policies, this 2Gen is not a program. And 2Gen is not a policy. It's a way of changing how we disrupt poverty and bolster family well-being and economic stability. And so it's an opportunity for all of us to lead 2 inches differently from how we're leading now, and to partner differently, and to really ask ourselves what we need to do differently, both as leaders in our teams and in our agencies, because in this, the only agency is the family.
And
Wonderful.
this is
Thank you
Rosa
so much.
Maria with one last thought, and that is Elaine, you know, as an official, reflected herself on how important it is for service providers, you know, nonprofit agency leaders, advocates, et cetera, to reflect back to legislators, to state agency leaders, to state leaders, and, you know, in many different positions, what the needs are for the families that you're serving. And I don't want to leave that piece of the puzzle out of the equation as we think about, pulling from this program source, pulling from philanthropy. Ultimately, this is looking towards system change. And the folks that, you know, anyone can make a difference there, but, you know, there are huge dollars that we've got to think about new ways. The work that Elaine is doing in Region 1, this really exciting work. You could point to other places and say, these other places are doing this. Why aren't we? This other state that is influential, you know, in your state, they've already taken this step. Why haven't we? So that kind of, you know, you might call it an advocacy lens, but it's not even advocacy. It's just education lens to political leaders, agency leaders, and both engaging them in your work, but also reflecting back. We need this, you know, kind of, if this work could stream down in this way that is different, it would allow us to do X. You know, can you consider these particular ideas and, you know, funding needs that we have to accomplish these very lofty goals that we share together? So I just want to make a point about not leaving the, you know, political leadership, agency leadership, state leadership, local leadership at any level outside of the equation when you think about funding and financing strategies. You'd be surprised about what could happen.
Thank you very much, Rosa Maria. I know there are actually 2 quick questions that are emerged. One is, like, there's been quite a bit of discussion about opportunity zones and, you know, innovations that, you know, happen maybe more so in urban places. Would you say that there are some emerging trends, or is there some emerging guidance related to resourcing the whole family approach or the 2-generation approach in rural or tribal places?
Hi, this is Elaine. The opportunity zones are in the rural sector, so really good idea to look at them there. I think transportation is an issue, an area that is keenly positioned in the rural sector because of how hard it is to get from one place to another. So I'd look at transportation opportunities as a way to position 2Gen and to partner there. The social health issues and looking at ways that people are providing health services in the rural sector is a way to look at 2Gen. So, and also family child care as a way to think about 2Gen in the rural sector. Those are just some off the top of my head through your question and where I experienced 2Gen coming up in rural conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine. And so the other question had to do with any new research or studies that are evidence-informed or evidence-based. So, of course, you all referenced some of that in today's presentation, and we will share resources and follow-up to today's conversation in our follow-up email. But if there are any other emerging resources that you are aware of, would love to give you an opportunity to call those out for our listeners today.
One of the groups that's partnering on 2Gen now from a whole family approach is the Federal Reserve, and they're beginning to look at the cliff effect. So the Atlanta Fed Reserve is doing really stunning work on poverty disruption, looking at what happens when I, as a low-income person, get a job and lose my safety net. They're coming up with some really interesting work. So I'd look at the Fed Reserve in Atlanta and their work on this. I think the Aspen Institute, Ascend, working on 2Gen, has a whole area to look at of research. The federal government has some different research pieces that are in process now through the research arms, looking at methods to address the cliff effect. There's a new Council on Economic Mobility, which I'll be glad to share the details of, that will be chaired by Secretary Azar. And that's going to be looking at an integration across all these silos, disrupt poverty, and combining and pooling all the research. So I'll also send the information on the Council on Economic Mobility.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so for the attendees of today's presentation, we would invite you to give these wonderful panelists a round of applause by putting a smiley face in your chat window right now to let them see and feel your energy, because we thank you for taking the time out to participate in this very important discussion. And again, Elaine Zimmerman, Rosa Maria Castaneda, and Gail Hayes, we are very, very grateful for your wisdom as it relates to this important conversation, and one we see as being vital to the sustainability of the whole family approach. And so this concludes today's presentation. We invite everyone to join us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for Webinar Wednesdays. Our next one is coming up December 4th, analyzing whole family pilots, a 2-generation evaluation report from Metropolitan Action Committee. They are one of our community of practice members and have a wonderful report that they will share with us. Additionally, we want to invite everyone to continue to take advantage of resources on Community Action Academy, where today's resources will be available, but other resources related to our various innovative approaches will be available across various topic areas. On January 8th through the 10th of 2020, the partnership will be convening in San Juan, Puerto Rico for our Management and Leadership Training Conference, and we invite you to join us. And again, we thank all of our panelists today as well as the partnership team. If you have any questions about what was shared today, feel free to email us. There will be a follow-up email containing the slide deck from today, the link to the recording, and additional follow-up resources. We do hope that you will remain engaged with this important conversation. Thank you again for your time. This concludes our webinar. Make it an awesome day. Bye-bye now.